Hello everybody, welcome to episode 163 of Show Viewers. Today we'll be going over on the Genealogy of Morals by Friedrich Nietzsche. Or Friedrich, however you want to say his name. But yeah, this book is a philosophy book by, as I said, Friedrich Nietzsche. And he's one of the more renowned philosophers throughout history. He was a German philosopher, and he wrote quite extensively. He wrote Ec Homo, Beyond Good and Evil, Human All Too Human, On the Genealogy of Morals. And those are all only ones I know right off the top of my head. But, crap, there's another one. Is it either or? No, I think either or was Kant, but I'm not for certain. But yeah, so I wanted to read some more philosophy, and Nietzsche was one of the ones I really wanted to get into. So I bought some of his books. I ended up buying Beyond Good and Evil, Human All Too Human, and On the Genealogy of Morals. And I saw that On the Genealogy of Morals was a good starting point, and I can say that it was. And also, it was the shortest that I had. But yeah. So, on the Genealogy of Morals. So, as always, before I go over the philosophy book, I will preface I'm not a philosopher, so I would kind of give you the brief points of what I derived from it, and then obviously go read it yourself. Go read it yourself, absolutely. Because I mean, this one was only $9.95 for a very, as you can see, dense book, like word wise. Like this is a 158-page book, and it's got about every page is that full of words. So I highly recommend getting it because you're getting out your bang for your buck for only $10 for this. But yeah, I got the Arcturus pocket edition here because I love the Arcturus pocket editions. They're generally some of my favorite books of all time. I have so many of their editions. I have like The Prince, Way of the Samurai, the book of the Five Rings, Sun Tzu's The Art of War, all of my Nietzsche stuff. What else do I have? The Egyptian Book of the Dead. Yeah, so I have a bunch of their stuff in like the little like pocket editions. Yeah, so actually on to the concept of the book. So one of the first things we see is he discusses the uselessness of pity and how that is a common thing throughout all philosophical beliefs, that pity is essentially useless because it does nothing to promote man's development or do really anything. So that's kind of one of the first major points he makes really in the preface. And then we actually get onto the genealogy of morals once we actually get into the first couple of essays, because there are 3 essays that compose this book and a preface, and the discussion of the actual genealogy of morals happens at the end of the preface, beginning of the first essay. But yeah, so we start to discuss the concept of where good derives from. Now he discusses about how the term good, from his theory, derives from the aristocrats, because as we see in society, what was established as good originally was the upper class. Once classes were established, we saw that the aristocrats, also known as the nobles, you know what noble is synonymous with? Heroic, good, just generally great individuals. And therefore, the aristocrats established themselves as the concept of good. So that is where the idea of concept come from. But there always must be 2 sides of a coin. Therefore, the lesser people, or the peasants, plebeians, proletariat, whatever you want to call them, were deemed bad or evil or unjust. Thieving, mongrels, and all that. So yeah. So he proposes this idea that due to the establishment of aristocracy and a caste/class system, the concept of good and evil were founded. And I believe that's honestly kind of a valid point, because we have seen throughout all of history that the creme de la creme, or the highest echelon of society, always create what is. They tell us what the truth is, and we're expected to I don't want to say slack it. I don't know the correct word, but just slow it all down. And that is fitting here. Like, I can absolutely see if you don't presume it's obviously from an atheistic point of view, because Nietzsche was an atheist. He did not believe in. He did do some early theological studies in his early life, but generally throughout all this, we can see that he is in fact atheistic in his beliefs. But yeah, so if you take it from the point of view that you don't believe in God or a Christian God or the Christian God or anything like that, then that is obviously a very good point that he's making here. And I believe, if I was not personally a Christian, I didn't believe that the concepts of good and evil were divinely created, then, well, obviously evil wasn't divinely created. Well, I mean, yes, everything was created divinely. So yeah, I'd say evil was. I'm going off crazy, but yeah. So, yeah, so that is the discussion of like kind of the big genealogy of mortals. And that's really like where the genealogy of good and evil are like predominantly discussed. We also get to see how he he gets to go on a tirade about the Jews, and he gets to mention about how they're like some of the most hateful people and stuff like that. He's not an anti-Semite, as he says, and here he actually undermines and demeans the anti-Semitic like movements in Germany at the time. But he has some, let's say, choice views on the Jewish culture and people. But yeah, so we see that, and I guess I'm gonna kind of skip over some like Jewish stuff because he does mention about how like they have caused the destruction of societies due to their hate and desire for revenge and stuff like that, which is absurd. But yeah. So after that, we end up going into the concept of destroying the human within people. So he pushes the idea that religions such as Judaism and Christianity were established to tame man, to kick the how I remembered it was freak destruction, to kick the freak out of man. I know it's a very childish way of putting it, to kick the wild beast out of man. They were used to tame man when man was never really supposed to be tamed from Nietzsche's point of view. It is essentially a castration of what it is to be human, because you're cutting off that capacity to commit atrocious things or to do, I guess, outlandish things, even though they may not be atrocious, by removing that. You're removing a person's humanity. You're not removing their whole humanity, because the capacity to do stuff like that, to be absurd, is not what makes you human, however, at least in my point of view, but it is a removal of an aspect of humanity. Therefore, once you cannot access that aspect, you cannot be a complete human. Or not really access that, access that aspect, then you lack the capacity to be purely human, because you do not have the option to fall into that, and therefore you're not fully human, because all humans have the option to fall into that depravity. And so he suggests that, I guess, religion acts as a way to cull humanity, not in terms of like populace, but to cull it in terms of nature. Yeah, so then after that, we get to see as he goes into a brief, well, not brief, but quite extensive tirade on punishment. And he discusses how punishment was originally bestowed for not necessarily revenge, but to ward people off. He states that punishment is kind of an absurd concept, because we see as punishment is used to ward off evildoers rather than to punish or get revenge upon those who did it. Yes, it's used for that, but it's also used to maintain order. It's more used to teach a lesson to future people who may have been prospective criminals than to actually get revenge on people. Yeah, then we actually get to see, then as he begins to discuss the concept of justice, and we see that he isn't really a fan of the idea of justice. He believes that justice is simply used to make agreements and cull tense situations between people. And that, honestly, like, I don't have much to comment on that. It's just the opinion that he holds. And then also we get some more elaboration on how man has been tamed, how we see that man is progressively being tamed by this exposure to religion and stuff like that. And then we end off getting into a discussion of actual like philosophers. We see as he discusses the concept of philosophers and the, I'm gonna butcher this word probably, but the ascetic lifestyle, ASCETIC. I'm probably saying that wrong. I've never heard the word before reading this book, so I had to look it up. I didn't look at the phonetical pronunciation of it. I just looked at the definition. And it's essentially extreme monasticism. We see as he discusses like how a philosopher comes to this desire to do this, and how a philosopher acts, like what is behind a philosopher. He kind of breaks down what makes a philosopher, and we see how he mentioned about how it's like a common aversion to like fame, wealth, and stuff like that. And yeah, so then after that, we see as he goes on a discussion of like discussing the weak of society, discussing those who are lesser, or those who are stunted or deformed or sickly in a society. And he goes on a tirade about how these weakest are the true enemy, because the weakest, from his perspective, like I said, none of this is me saying this, it is his words that I have read. We see as he discusses about how the weakest are those who are filled with envy and jealousy of those who are above them, or those who are healthy, etc. And we see that because of this, they seek to bring the downfall of these people. They need to have a reason, so they need to have someone to blame for their problems. Therefore, they most often blame those who are above them, those who are those superior beings. And so we see that because of this, they take into action, they they take action into their own hands. They begin to do things that they are actually capable of doing. We see as they poison people, as they spread their sickness and stuff like that. So he proposes, just as how he proposes that the Jews are the cause of a lot of problems, that the weakly are those who cause problems within society, those who lead to the detriment and stagnation of development of humanity. It's just they hold humanity back by, I mean, not really by, but through their jealousy, because they do not want to really see the betterment of the world. They want to see the payment, the recompense for what they are experiencing. They want to see the world burn because of how they are feeling. Yeah, so then after that, he begins to discuss the concept of like depression and nihilism and stuff like that, because though I'm pretty certain Nietzsche, when I was like looking into him, he was considered a nihilistic philosopher, but he shows an immense aversion to nihilism in this and pessimism in general. He like literally calls it out on multiple occasions. But yeah, so we see as he discusses the concept of reflection, he mentions about how to grapple with the concepts that we have to deal with and the possibility of pessimism, to rid those from our minds, to rid the concept of feeling worthless or not enough or just feeling like incapable of doing anything. We then go or to deal with really the aspects of the ascetic lifestyle of having nothing and suffering because of that, or having to avoid temptation and stuff like that. We end up going to deflection, to I guess kind of fool our minds into believing that that is not there. I mentioned this stuff like being charitable, going around doing things, doing hobbies, writing, etc. And that's honestly a absolutely valid point. People do fall into certain things to avoid others. Like, say for example, like if you have something on your mind and you're struggling, and you go for a run. Going for a run is like proven to help with any like mental turmoil you're having, or at least not really cure, but like help it, assist it, make it easier. And that is true. Like, that happens. People do that. They put their mind onto other things to, I guess, take their mind off of others. But yeah, so that's absolutely a valid concept that he discusses here. And then after that, he just kind of discussed like the concept of truth. He mentioned about how truth is a god to a lot of previous authors, but then philosophers like such as Plato. But then he mentions about how, what if there's not a truth? What if there is just error in believing that there is a truth? And we see as he kind of goes into that deeper and kind of discusses it more. Like, this part of the story kind of started to bore me at the end, but like it is still an interesting concept. And I really enjoyed the discussion of the deflection prior to this. But yeah, I honestly really enjoyed this book. I feel like it was very insightful, and for him to have kind of an inherent hatred towards certain groups, even though it's not, I don't know if it's necessarily a hatred. I believe it might have been like the thing for the times. I'm not for certain. But yeah, he had some good points in this. Like I said, with the deflection, with the possibility of the aristocracy being where good derives itself from, and just other things within it. Like, I really enjoyed reading this, and I most certainly already own some more niche, so I'll be reading that. But I greatly enjoyed this book, and I believe it is a great starting point. Because I looked it up, and it's like, yeah, it's a great starting point for people wanting to get into Nietzsche. So I would recommend it. Yeah, I'd absolutely recommend this book. Out of the philosophy books I've read Meditations, The Abolition of Man, and now On the Genealogy of Morals. Also, I've read like some Eastern stuff. Like, you consider the book of the Five Rings, or like The Way of the Samurai. I haven't read The Way of the Samurai yet, I actually don't think. But yeah, or The Prince. The Prince is probably, if you consider it to be philosophy, it's probably my favorite work of philosophy. But this one, if I just consider Meditations, The Abolition of Man, and on the genealogy of morals, obviously, I would probably tie it with The Abolition of Man. I do like Meditations the most out of these so far, but also this book was really good, and The Abolition of Man is also really good. I'd highly recommend that. It's by C.S. Lewis, and you can get it for very cheap. But yeah, so that's all there really was for On the Genealogy of Morals by Friedrich Nietzsche, and that's all I really have for episode 163 of Shelf Review. So, thank you very much for watching.